Hi guys, I thought I'd do a short video, or it'd probably end up being a long video, on how to set up the Mech Junior 600. I'm fairly new to reloading, and I found the greatest frustration was to try and produce a shell that actually looked like a shell. When I got the Mech, it arrived in a box, lovely piece of kit, put it together, assuming, as I was told, that it was set up ready to go for the shell size I wanted, and in fact it wasn't. So I crushed hull after hull. I got seriously frustrated with the whole thing, and by a long process of trial and error, picking a few people's brains, seemed to have just about got it right. And so the purpose of this video was to try and help you guys out that have bought yourself a Mech and are struggling to get a hull out of it, and before you throw it through the window, as I very nearly did a couple of times, I thought I'd walk you through the whole thing as I've set mine up, show you how it's producing hulls, and it might save you a bit of heartache. And for those guys that are more experienced than me, you know all this anyway, but it's just to help the newbies out and get them on their way. Right, what we're going to try and achieve with the Mech, in my understanding, and you experienced guys will have to forgive me for this is just purely what I've found. What we're trying to get is the handle to produce the same pressure every single time. So it's going to come down and hit the stop each time it does a station to there. Okay? So every time the hull moves around the stations in its process to being turned into a cartridge, we want to hit that stop and know that it's right. So the first station we're going to start with is, I'll move the camera around, and we're going to start with the depriming and resizing. Okay, you have to bear with me wobbling about a bit. There's the resizing and deprimer bar. Okay, you can just see it now in there. Let's just tilt the camera down a tad. That obviously needs to come down, and when our handle stops, we want a very tiny clearance just here. Okay, if it hits the deck before the handles come down, that's not achieving what we want to achieve. So you want a very small clearance there, just enough for the rim size of the shell. Okay, so that's achieved by undoing, tilt the camera back again, these two rings here. So you have the top one and the bottom one, and you adjust those and then lock them tight until you've got that literally coming down nicely from the seat. Okay, so that's the first stage. Second stage is the depriming. That's all fairly obvious. That'll stay as is. Sorry, repriming. That'll come down inside the hull and produce the reprime. Right, the next area that was a problem, and I struggled to get help with this. Let's just move the whole thing back a little bit so you can see it a bit better. Was the rammer tube. Now, when mine arrived, it was just ramming the bod down so tight that it was giving much too much clearance. It was probably dangerous on gases as well. So obviously the first few hulls, they were just stripped and put back together again. Just get that back up again. But this rammer tube here is held in situ by an Allen key just here. Okay, it's just a crush pin, crush clip, and it holds this rammer tube. Now, the advice that I got, and with it, trial and error, was to slacken this right off. You might have to actually slip the whole rammer tube up and out, and just give it a little bit of lubricant so it'll slide nicely up and down inside that collar. You might have to slacken the screw off and just prise that ring apart, just so this rammer tube will slide up and down nicely. When you've resized your hull and primed it, and you've dropped the powder shot, or the powder charge, and you put your wadding in, the purpose of the rammer is to obviously just pack the whole lot down. Now, I found the best way of doing it, once you've got the wadding in, and I'll run through this in a minute, once you've got the wadding in, if you just, still with this rammer tube loose, don't let it touch anything, push your wadding down with a pen manually inside the shell, and then what you want to do is to pull the handle down like this on the shell, making sure the rammer tube is nice and freely moving and away from the wadding, and just very lightly by hand slide that rammer tube down until it just touches the wadding. Okay? Now you can make a note of exactly where it is with these increments on here, these little grinding marks, or a pencil mark or whatever else, so that when you lift it up out of the way, it doesn't move, and you can pinch this little Allen key back up, so that you know every time you then thereafter put your wadding in, and in the case of the shells I'm using, I've got an overshot card and a fibre wad. When you pull the rammer tube down to seat them, it's not going to over pressurise them, it's just going to pop them down just to sit on top of the powder. Okay, hope that makes sense. Right, the next issue is the first stage crimp. Now with this, I found all sorts of interesting facets to it. This little spindex is supposed to spin and obviously find the crimps on the old hull and line itself up. Now I'll put a picture on this video in a minute for you to see, but what I was finding was it was crushing the edges of the shell, particularly on the 20 gauge. Now, I found the best setting for this was to have this as high up as it will go, so there's obviously a nut inside there that you slacken right off as far as it will go, and do this top nut up as much as it will go, so that's as tight up as it will go. Now, inside here, take it off, you can obviously see the little, well, you might not be able to see them, the little raised bars that produce the crimp. Now, there will be a picture in a minute showing you that inside here, at 3 places, there was a bar that ran all the way down. Now what this was doing was actually crushing the top of the shell. So with the aid of a Dremel and a modelling knife, I just took the bar out. I'll show you a picture in a minute and you'll be able to see. Now that stopped the top of the shell dipping. So that wants to be all the way up. And what I did after I took those bars out, I've just put that piece of paper there with a marker on it, and that lines up with one of the bars inside, and I just make sure that lines up on with one of the dips on the shell, and then it'll find its own way. Right, the final area, which was difficult to set up, is the final crimp station and plunger. Now, for those that you have just bought a mech and don't know, this does 2 things. This unit here, it does 2 things. Inside is on the end of this bar, there's a flat round piece of plate, and the function of that is obviously to produce the flat part here inside the shell. Okay. This outside section helps to squash these petals in here and push the crimp in together, and it also produces a slight round on the edge there so that the shell will go into your breech properly. Now this is quite a complicated thing to set up because it's very, very adjustment sensitive. What I would suggest you do is there's 2 adjustments here. This is what they call the cam. Just put the camera back again. This bit here is called the cam. Still can't see it. Let me get it together. There we go. This area here is called the cam. You'll see it's got a little adjustment Allen key. Now what you want to do is to undo that and slide this cam as far away up as it will go and lock it up. It only goes about a quarter of an inch, but just lock it up as far as you can go. That means you've taken all of the tension off the top part of this crimp. The next thing to do is to undo this nut under here and slacken with the aid of a screwdriver, flat blade screwdriver, undo this bolt here. That'll have the effect of raising the plunger inside away from the cartridge. Don't do it too much because you'll end up taking the whole thing off, but you'll work that out. And what I suggest you do is you get a already formed shell and pop it into your final stage crimp. Okay, just pop it into your final stage crimp. As you bring the bar down and it hits our stop, you very gently wind that screw in, which will take the plate down on top of the crimp, and that will give you a pretty accurate finish stage. Nip the bolt up, and so you now know that that flat area in there is near enough right. Okay, so do it with the factory finish cartridge and then you should be able to replicate that. Once you've done that, the next setting obviously is this crimp finish. Now I've got a couple of cartridges here just to show you what happens when this is out of adjustment. The further up, let's get it back up again. The further up that this goes, i.e. the more light you see under this nut, the more pressure it will put on the cam. Okay, which means it will throw this final shaping die down too far, and what that actually does is it crushes in the petals of the cartridge. You can see how that is, where inside there it's just been pushed so tight like that that it's actually forcing, the petals are too long effectively, and the only way they can miss each other is by bypassing each other, so you get this swirling pattern. Okay, so what you want to do is to, you know your depth is right because you've set that with a factory shell. What I would suggest you do is start off with this cam here set so it's up that way as far as it can go, and you try a shell. If you're not happy and it's producing slightly too open crimps, then just slacken that off and just move it down a tiny little bit. Now both this and this are very adjustment sensitive, so do, you know, like a millimetre at a time, no more. Okay, and that will have the effect of bringing in the top of the shell and closing the petals up. If you don't do it enough, the petals will stay open and you'll have gaps. If you do it too much, it will crush the top. Okay, so right, I'm going to quickly run through loading a shell now, and we'll just take a few measurements as well. I've got an old shell here, it needs redoing, and it's measuring, let's try and do it with the camera, I'm measuring this at 67 millimetres. Okay, it's not quite 70 millimetre, it's 67 millimetres. I'll go through the process of depriming and priming. So that's deprimed and sized. Put the primer in. Reprimed. Okay. Right, next stage in here is to drop our powder charge. Drop that down to the bottom, powder charge over. Can't quite see it, but it's powder charge, and probably see it better through the side actually. Okay. Right, now the next stage is to put my overshot card on in my felt wad. And this is the stage I was saying about setting the rammer tube up. Obviously the rammer tube is going to push that lot down, and we want it to go down and actually stop. And it's this stage, when you do a dry run, you want to set your rammer tube so it's literally just touching that. If you make up a shell first of all and just put the wadding in by hand with around a bit of dowel or something, and just seat it down in the powder, and then just drop your rammer tube down and so it actually sits on the top of the wadding, crimp that little nut up, and then every time you do that it's going to give you exactly the same depth. Okay, so that's that stage done. We're going to now drop our shot. Now for this shell, I'll give you a measurement of how far away the shot is from the top. It's a bit difficult to read that. It's about 11 millimeters, I'd say. About 11 millimeters. Okay. If it's too deep, your shell will end up looking like this with a big hole in it. So if your shell does that, it's nothing to do with the second stage or the first stage crimping, it's the fact that there isn't enough shot in there. Okay, so you need to raise the column of the wadding inside there to take it up, or put a card in or something, or trim your shell down to make sure that you have the right depth. So around with our crimp station. You see that there? Yeah. First stage. Now I've found that that is enough crimp. It doesn't need any more crimp than that. Okay, just literally just starts it going. And down to the second stage, all the way down. Hold it for a second. And that's the final crimp. Okay, it's a relatively neat crimp. Okay, I hope that's been fairly informative. I found it a real struggle to try and work out how to use this, and fortunately most of the good reloading guys in the UK, they're all up north and miles away from me, so I've had to sort of struggle and work this out myself. Because of the crimps of exactly the same problem I had with the 20 gauge. Now these are the crimps it's now producing. This is really weird trying to put this in front of the camera. Back it off so it focuses a bit better. You can see they're pretty good now, pretty uniform. And again, all the same things apply. Making sure you haven't got your cam too over tight, which is producing the swirl, that you haven't got the plunger inside the second cam too low, so it's producing too deep a crimp. So it's just balancing those two, but as I say, just make sure that you do the adjustments very, very in small increments, and yeah, happy reloading. Okay, cheers guys.